Welcome everybody to the Role of Instructor and Remote Learning. My name is Lacey Sorrell. I'm going to be your host. In this webinar, we're going to cover how a professor prepares for teaching for face-to-face courses, as well as how that is a little bit different and how they've shifted to meeting student needs while we're all working remote. During this webinar, you will have an opportunity to submit questions for our panelists. Please use the Q&A button that you see on your screen. Unfortunately, we have it set up so that you can't share your video, but you can interact with us through that Q&A. Please make sure that, but this webinar is being recorded. We will make the recording and any shared materials available to you on the same page where you registered. And I'd like to take some time now to introduce our panelists. First, we have Christoper Dolder, who's with Meadow School of the Arts. He is an associate professor and chair of dance. We have Kathleen Gallagher with Meadow School of the Arts, who is an assistant professor of arts management and arts entrepreneurship. We have Barbara Kincaid with Cox School of Business, who is a senior lecturer in business law. We have Jen Linck, who is Cox School of Business, distinguished chair in finance. We have Bivin Sadler with SMU Global and Online, who is a technical assistant professor and course lead faculty. And we have Steven Sekula with Dedman School of Humanities and Science, who is an associate professor of experimental particle physics and director of graduate studies in physics. That's a little bit of a mouthful. I figured I would let you guys say hello before we ask our first question. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. So, panelists, I guess what everybody came here to talk about today is specifically, what is your view of role of instructors in a classroom environment, and how do you feel that that's different in online education? That seems to be a big topic of conversation. It's why we're here. Who would like to go ahead and kick us off with what you feel our role of instruction is?
Well, I can kick off. I think the first thing, particularly in terms of the, I have a highly physical art form that's really, at first glance, like, wow, how are you going to necessarily do that? And I think the very most important thing of the role of the instructor is to first establish the new guidelines and the new parameters. If we have a class that generally is teaching a student to move across the floor by 50 and 60 feet, but factually that is now impossible, and they have at most maybe a 6x6 area, you have to readjust what your entire expected learning outcome is and be very clear about what that outcome is with the students so that they don't feel like they're being dinged by where they are. And any and all instruction also, you might have space, but you still have to be realizing that the end result is what they can produce in their confined space. And that was a big challenge for each and every one of my faculty. And my main parameter with all that is, as the instructor, is to be very clearly define what your expectations of learning are. Just instead of the comprehensive, we're going to get a great class and you're all going to be just sucking air at the end of it and aerobic. It's like, no, we are going to work on this module. We're going to be very clear with it, very concise, and really have student interaction using Panopto for students to send in videos, and then you can meet with them. So just be very clear and defined about what is, as opposed to what was originally expected when they signed up on the course.
That is a really good answer. Barbara, would you like to?
Sure, I can speak to that in a very different context. The key for me in the transition was trying to teach the class online as engaged as I was able to in the classroom. And we had a leg up, I think, in the spring, even though it was unexpected, but we'd spent 8 weeks with them, okay? And we understood each other, and they knew what to expect from me as in terms of what I would expect from them. I think all of us, even though the substance is crucial, we are essentially the director, the writer, the lead performer, and now more than ever, the producer of an experience, and that has to keep the audience, in my view, constantly engaged. And what's different with online is it's one step further, okay? Especially if you've got 50 of them and all those little faces and 2 screens full, okay? To keep them constantly engaged, it is different. So the energy it took and the commitment to keep every one of those little faces engaged is that much harder when you don't have them spread out in a room.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Bivin, you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Can I, yeah, if I could piggyback on top of that, it'd be awesome. Cool, I couldn't agree more. Like, we're the head cheerleader, but we're also the instructor and we're the producer. And this can work. I've taught like classes of 15 to 20 on the graduate side and just finished a class of 120 in the stat side, which, you know, I'll assume maybe we will or maybe we won't going forward, depending on what happens, have those size classes, but we can absolutely do that. You know, the difference between on campus, I'm very much, fortunately and unfortunately, the sage on the stage in the classroom. I love being, you know, it's a big show, it's a big production. And, you know, you learn everybody's names. And, you know, the old saying in high school teaching, at least, was they never know how much you know until they know that you care. And if you can come across that in the classroom, I found over the years, you can do that exactly as well online. But there's things you can do online that are actually enhance what you could do in the classroom. And so just, and we've got lots to talk about in this hour, but just to throw one of those out there is the fact that, you know, in class, for the class of 120, hey, everybody get in groups of 3. That's never going to happen. By the time you've gotten everybody back and forward, like the period will be over. But you can do that instantly in Zoom. You can knock them into breakouts. Jim made a great point in 2 panels ago, where we've got to have them doing things before live sessions so we can make the most efficient use of that. So I have a thing called the 4 class assignment that they do, and they submit to Canvas, and we check it. You know, you've got to be on top of it, so that if you don't check it, they won't do it. But you check it, and then we can come in and boom, go straight to breakout, compare answers, give a solution, straight to breakout, compare answers, give a solution. And for small classes and big classes, I've been really excited about kind of that about that method that's available to us online. But thanks.
Thank you, Bivin. Jim, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I would agree with all this. These are, you know, you get so many ideas serving on these panels and sitting in, regardless of what you had, you always get something new. Because I was gonna, I'll piggyback on Bivin and say, you know, I think it's more challenging to engage the students sometimes in the online environment than you can in the classroom. Or maybe the better word is different. It's very different. And, you know, Barbara mentioned having these 50 little faces. We have lots of classes that have 50 or 60, and that's actually going to have, that really kind of has to change to some degree in the online environment because it's really hard. But you have to figure out ways to keep them engaged. And I would say a couple things, and these are repeats if you were in the morning session, but I think it's fundamentally important. Even, you know, you're an electric lecturer in the classroom and stuff, so you do a lot of lectures and you're mixing it up with them solving problems and you're doing problems and stuff. If you're lecturing, just doesn't work very well in an online live session. It just doesn't. You have to have more interactions. So what we tend to do is try to get them, and I like what Bivin's idea of having an assignment or a quiz at the beginning or something like that at the beginning of the live sessions, because if students don't come prepared, it just doesn't work very well. And that's some of the biggest frustration that a lot of us had, particularly when we got thrown in, you know, in really short order. Now we're figuring this out. So the stuff that is, you know, you have the students read the chapter. You don't read it to them like we did in kindergarten. You can have them go through your lectures, the majority before that. So get all that stuff that you just don't need, that you're just talking to them, and do that asynchronously. Give them the incentives and the motivation to do it ahead of time. And then you just, what I do is I start out my live sessions and I bring up a couple slides that just reinforces the most important points. And then I go into Q&A and solving problems and asking questions and things like that. And you got to have them working. And as we talked about earlier as well, I'm always doing something on the screen. I always have my screen shared almost the entire classroom, except when I have the students share their screen back to me. So we're always doing something. It's like I'm at the whiteboard almost the entire class if I was in a classroom. Much more so. I think it works in the regular classroom as well, but I just think it's more important. And the other thing I'll just add to that, I think the other thing is it's a bit more important to sort of plan ahead of your online live sessions, even more so than in the classroom. You can sort of do more things on the fly, I think, in the classroom. You know, you got to be a little bit more planned so that they have done, if they haven't done X and Y, you're still frustrated in the classroom, but it's easier to get away with it, I think. And in the live sessions, it just doesn't work as well.
Thank you, Jim. Kathleen, what do you think of the role of an instructor face-to-face versus online?
So thinking about this ahead of time was kind of at this point of Bivin of thinking about kind of the sage on the stage versus the guide on the side, excuse me, in this dichotomy, and going, but we don't really stay in one role. We move between these, right? And so with this online, like, it's even more powerful that we can do the sage on the stage part in advance, and then, as Jim was talking about, move into this having them do the work in class. And one of the workshops I attended, Harvard did some, and they said, cold calling's horrible in person, it's impossible online. Do warm calling. So to the extent that I could prep them ahead of time and say, here are the discussion questions, come ready to these. And my classes are 30, so I'm not the 50, 60, I'm not 120, I'm 30. We can have good discussions, but the breakout rooms have been great with this also, where they can try things out. So there's technology that we can do. And I have to say, the breakout room, the first time I did it and I dropped into one of their rooms, they were totally surprised because they had no idea we could do that. And suddenly the breakout rooms changed by the next class. So the technology is awesome, and they don't see us coming across the classroom to them, which maybe helps them stay on task a little bit.
All right, I want to give Stephen his chance to answer before we get to our first question from our audience.
Well, since I want us to get to questions, I'll keep it brief. A lot of the panelists have already hit on things I would have said anyway. I'll just add one thing. And I think that because we are now so socially distanced across this large digital divide, it's more important than ever for us to express our humanity with our students. It is easy to fall into the trap when you're in the classroom that, you know, I'm the teacher, you're the student, we have our roles. Those roles get exaggerated when you are physically distanced, and it's very easy to drift apart. So just as an example, one thing I did a little left turn in my honors introductory physics class. That's a very hands-on class. Students come to class, they don't know what the activity is in advance, that's the point. And then we drop them in the middle of an activity. Maybe they have to design an egg drop device to protect an egg. And then there's a ranking of, you know, how high they can drop it from versus survivability. We can't do that. I don't want to hear from parents that their kid splattered egg all over the kitchen floor. So what I did instead was we did physics in the kitchen one night, kind of a non-destructive, non-lethal physics in the kitchen thing, where I moved this whole rig downstairs to the kitchen and broadcast from the kitchen in the house. And we measured the speed of light using a chocolate bar and a microwave oven. We made non-explosive fireworks using food coloring and oil and water. And we made oobleck, which is just cornstarch and water, and talked about non-Newtonian fluids. But it was very personal. They're in my kitchen, right? Everything's right there. My spouse is taking pictures of this from the side and distracting me. It made it more human for them, like this was all happening in real time. And they went to their kitchens and did it too, where they could. So I think humanity has to be amplified even more in this time.
I want to take your class, Stephen.
There's a video of
That's
it.
what I just said.
No wonder I loved physics in high school, and then we just had Slinkies. I digress.
So the question that we received were asking for examples of motivation that you provide to your students, and what kinds of work do you normally assign to be done before class starts? Let me know. Barbara, you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I briefly and with humility, because I'm sure there are even better ideas. I've always had discussion questions before class, and we're expected to come to class ready to discuss. I love the notion of warm calling that I think Kathleen brought up. Everybody's supposed to be prepared, and so therefore they're ready, and we know where we're going to go. And those are the platform for the discussion. When again, I become the guide on the side. I love that phrase as well. I'm adding daily quizzes at the front end, as Bivin said, particularly for my 3-hour May-term classes, daily May-term classes. We got to have that on that, and they're really going to count. I mean, it's going to be a big deal kind of thing. I met with them by Zoom a week ago, as I did with my spring break transition, and said, hey, you know, this is what way it's going to be. But by the way, I gave them extra credit to come to that, because otherwise they would have had a conflict. But they'll come for extra credit, okay? And then calling on students who appear to be disengaged and that type of thing in a courteous, warm way, particularly if they're laughing, looking at something else that suggests perhaps there's another monitor there and they're watching something else kind of thing. Everybody kind of goes, oh, okay, well, I better be on top of it. Just a few thoughts.
Bivin, do you want in on this one?
Sure. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I am on. Great. Yeah, I had dialed up something here, and then I decided, may I share my screen real quick? I can just kind of quickly show an example. And I think everybody's pretty familiar with the reverse classroom idea here. So just really quickly so I did the module thing, which I think a lot of people are doing, but it really helps kind of keep things in modules so everybody knows what's expected, and it makes it easy for me. So, and it kind of puts it in timeline order too, because there is a big thing, both in small and big classes, undergraduate and graduate, where there are to be prepared, there's also some moving parts. So to keep it consistent week to week, the first week, the second week, when does this due and when does that due? And then you get into a rhythm. But our rhythm was the reverse classroom style. You've got these videos, which of course it's nicer to put them in the smaller chunks. But they watched the videos, and then they would do what's called a 4-class assignment. So this was the 4-class assignment. And then I've got 2 versions of it. There's one that doesn't have the solutions. And then after class, I post the one that does have the solutions. So I make it really clear that for this class that here's some questions for you to work on. You're not expected to have the right answers, because they'll kind of get stressed out and have a lot of anxiety. Like, we're just it's a puzzle, and we're learning the pieces outside of live session, and we're using efficiently our time in live session to put those pieces together. And so if I can show you one quick example there, so yeah, so this is the solution, and this is the, so this is what they would get before class. So they'd say, oh, okay, what do I have to do today? Income, males versus females. I'm going to answer this breakout problem. I'm going to answer another breakout problem. And I've learned in a 50-minute class, I have about enough time to get through 2 breakouts. It seems like it'd go much faster, but I never got through more than 2 breakouts. And then, then we'll go over the solution. If I could take it here, this one right there. So then they go to breakout, they share their answers. They've got the same answer they don't have. They kind of meet somebody, give them a little virtual high five, and then we'll come in and then say, oh, okay, here was my solution. A lot of times there's more than one solution, and then post this later, so that those are things that I think that we can do in. And then there's a quiz that they do, which is really a homework assignment that has another question like that. That they've done on their own. They've seen a solution in class. They have the solution now do it on your own, and let's repeat next week, start with the videos again. That's basically the rhythm.
Can I jump in, Lacey, briefly?
Yes, please.
I'm not answering exactly the question, but pulling on what Barbara and Bivin said of the simplify and keep it organized. And it doesn't seem like we can get to as much online as we could in person in the same amount of time. So I think those are kind of big lessons that I took away in helping them prepare, is just really focus and keep it ordered for them.
Thank you very much. We actually have a question on what is a reverse classroom. Steven, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So when I first showed up at SMU, I did exactly what I saw the faculty I learned from did. And I stood up in front of a group of students teaching physics, and I talked to them for 80 minutes. That's how I was trained for the most part. Now, faculty colleagues of mine in physics gave lots of presentations about what's called the reversed or flipped classroom. And there's a whole segment of physics education research, which is a sub-branch in general of education research, that's looked at this model in the context of physics education. And generally speaking, the outcomes from flipping your classroom or reversing your classroom tend to be more permanent. They tend to stick around longer in the minds of the students that on average come out of your class. So what is it? Rather than lecturing for 80 minutes in front of your students, you front load the prep time before class with maybe reading and a lecture video. So for me, it's important to be creative in the classroom. And I don't like to use other people's lecture videos. It's not a knock on other people. It's for me. Because if I'm prepping the lecture videos, I'm reviewing the material. So the first semester I teach a class, I always put a sequence of videos together. You can find them on my YouTube channel. It's public. So I have 3 playlists, one for Physics 1, one for Physics 2, and one for Physics 3, which I just finished teaching. And they watch a video. Yes, they're long. I don't break them into pieces. I trust the students will play them at twice speed and break them into intervals that they can stomach. But they're typically 45 minutes to an hour long. And I factor that as part of their out-of-class preparation. They get a quiz that makes sure that they're doing the reading and watching the lecture video. So 3 questions, 5 minutes, real easy. They either read it or they didn't. And it's immediately obvious to me whether they did. They come to class, I know who did it and I know who didn't do it. And then in class, I demonstrate a problem-solving exercise at sort of the basic level of what I expect from them. Then for the rest of the class, which is typically 40 to 60 minutes, I hand it over to them and give them a sequence of problems, 2 or 3 problems, one at the beginner level, one at the intermediate level, and often a challenge problem for the students that are getting bored. And I offer them the chance to work them for extra credit. And I float around the room like a butterfly and I go where I'm needed. Now in the digital space, I still do the same thing. I demonstrate a problem-solving exercise. I break them out in Zoom into breakout rooms of typically 3 students. I only had a class of about 12 this semester for my 2 classes. And then I float around and I go where I'm needed. And the students who don't need me, they don't need me. The students who are struggling, they ask for help. And that way I can go put out educational fires where they're needed. That for me is what implementing the flipped classroom means.
Thank you very much. We have another question asking if any of you have experimented with gamification along the lines of Kugelman, Gartner, and especially Yuka Chow. And how have you been able to make those work if you have used those?
I'll just jump in and say I have not, so that's useful, right? But I will say a couple things. A couple of my faculty and surveys I did games when they were doing breaks. They were sharing video games and breaks just to break up the classroom and stuff. The other thing I say, 2 years ago, one of the final project for that a bunch of executive MBAs I had were actually starting a company to implement this in the classroom more. But I'm really curious what others would have to say. That it's taking off, but I don't know of anyone who's done it.
So I can offer a modest gamification that I've done in class. So I have an attendance and participation part of my grade. It's 5% of their final grade. So not much, just enough to persuade them that if they don't do it, they're not going to get the A they wanted. It'll drag them down to an A-, right? What I do is if they attend class, they get a 100% for attendance. If they do the problems in class and get them right, I will give them up to 10 extra % on top of that 100%. So they can go over 100% on attendance and participation. And boy, do they all work the problems because they think it's worth extra credit. But of course, if you do the math, it doesn't make that big a difference in the end, but it tells you who cares. And all the students at least attempt it, but some of them go way above and beyond.
If I could piggyback on that one as well, that's awesome. So yeah, gamification's tough, and I don't know that it's exactly like a game, but I teach a stats class, And so it lends itself very well to like a hackathon type thing. So in games, there's competition. And I've really found that if you make a competition out of something, especially if they're in groups or, you know, give them cool group names or whatever, they'll really go for it. So a hackathon would be something like, here's a data set and we're trying to predict something, and there's a loss function or a way to measure how close somebody is to the actual answers. So if you can find any way to put them in groups or even leave them individually, but to make a competition out of it, that's a very easy way to kind of really get people's competitive juices flowing. You'll really see a lot of creativity, but that could be done on campus or online though.
So I know that as a person who supports online education, one of the things that I get asked constantly is that there's no way to do physical activities with students who are online. And I know that several of you here have already shown that you do activities where students have to either be hands-on or they're physically out doing something. And how do you manage doing something that's a little less cerebral and a little more hands-on, a little more tactile inside of an online platform? Christoper, I would like to start with you if I could.
Well, I mean, you physicalize it with them. I think it's very important. You know, there's a style of study, and I learned from a man, David Wood, his body was basically ruined through muscular sclerosis by the time he was teaching me. So it was all verbal communication. It was very slow, and he would talk you through that. Well, that would just be impossible at this point because you just wouldn't get anywhere. And so I dance the class with my students. So therefore, if they pin me on the video, I'm constantly being the meter, because you know there's a latency, there's a lag. And so if I'm working with a live musician who's somewhere and I'm going, and then the students, we are all on slightly different times. So getting used to what is best for them, knowing what they're hearing. So it's an odd thing of both kind of like dancing for them, but also knowing that there's a bit of that latency. But more than anything, it's just that emphasizing less how perfect they are with timing because of this whole latency, and more about the actual content. Are you able to balance? Are you able to really understand this various connections of the muscles? So the more you are the kind of the metronome, the visual metronome, and at the same time that they kind of dance with you, that there's a responsibility there. And then, so they're getting that extra, at least singular proprioception, as opposed to maybe 16 or 20 that are around them. And then additionally, to kind of keeping them on their feet, in the sense that at any one moment, I can stop the class, ask one of those students to demonstrate that exercise, and then everyone will be able to watch and then chime in. So the students aren't allowed to be disengaged, because they know darn well the second, and I'm very perceptive of this, if I feel like a student is disengaging, they will be the next student to demonstrate, and they'll demonstrate a few times. And then it only takes one student to be called upon randomly to demonstrate, and then everyone, so my students know that I'm going to call on somebody. So I actually have a very, very committed class. I'm not really worried about people not being committed.
Thank you. Steven, I know that you were sharing how you were doing physics in your kitchen. Do you have other examples of going through experiments or something that normally is a very tactile thing to do while remote?
So I had a very, I think I had a very unique position this semester when COVID-19 changed everything for us. And that was, I was already teaching a third semester physics class, which is the gateway to our major, but which deals with concepts that are very difficult to realize in the physical world. And that's the whole point, is they're counterintuitive by their nature, because they apply to atoms and things smaller than atoms, which is not us. So the good news is that my students were already grappling with very difficult ideas that have been confirmed for a century now. But you can't just go in your kitchen and experiment with them. Not all. You can do some, but not all. So the nice thing is that for physics and math and chemistry and biology, there exists a set of digital teaching tools called the PhET Demonstration Toolkit, PhET, put out by the University of Colorado. And it has little modules in it that simulate physical phenomena. So I was able to do a laboratory exercise with my students where I gave them the simulator and said, I want you to construct a solid material made out of just 10 atoms and figure out what its properties are by making measurements in the simulation. You can't do that in the real world anyway. You can't take 10 atoms, line them up, and put a voltmeter across them and inspect them with a magnifying glass and see what they look like. That's not how it works. So the good news was they're already dealing with things that they can't really get their hands on directly anyway. So I would distribute that and then give them a worksheet, like a mini laboratory, and then float from room to room and see how they were doing. And they could turn that work in at the end. And then they had home, because I knew they wouldn't finish it in class, the homework just extended that.
Can I jump in on that one?
I was going to say,
I always want to
you
jump
look like
in.
you're about to.
Well, it's awesome. Like, I mean, that is exactly, I just wanted to say, as Stephen was talking about that, so like statistics, like we're rolling dice all the time in class and showing, bam, just like that. So, you know, so we're building different distributions. So we can flip a coin and see that type of distribution. We can roll a dice, and then we can use, we can roll the dice 5 times and get a mean and plot the mean and show how the uniform distribution turns into a more normal distribution. And just to Stephen's point, you can do that exactly with online tools. There's plenty of dice simulations out there that can actually work quicker, because it's kind of fun in the class, but throughout the rest of the whole class, I can hear which is kind of cool, but also distracting, I'm sure. So, but what I wanted to piggyback on that was the poll. So there's a lot of ways to use polls in Zoom. One way is Zoom. I've been, you know, you can use poll anywhere and stuff in the classroom, which is always, I've tried to use that for years, and there's always some hiccup to it, or it doesn't do exactly what I want. The Zoom poll is perfect for asking questions, but it'll also build a sideways histogram. So you can make it, I can say, hey, roll the dice and put in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it'll show a normal distribution, or it'll show that, that uniform distribution. So, you know, using polls in various creative ways is another really good way to engage students and also get your point across.
I guess that brings me to kind of a larger question of additional applications that you have found to be helpful. Is there any particular tip that you want to give to somebody who this is kind of their first stepping stone into teaching online? How would you prepare for it? What applications or additional resources do you think are the largest benefit?
I'll say something on that, and tell me if this is, you know, stop me if this is not what you're referring to. But, and this came up in the last session, it's a common thing people want to hear about, and that is, I think you have to have the ability to interact with your students in a different way. So, for example, you have to be able to write on a whiteboard, or write on an application, or do something interactive like that. So, you know, the tools, they asked us what tools were indispensable to us in the last session I participated in. And I said, one of them is, I use a Surface Pro with a pen, and I can write on anything in that. The other thing that almost everyone used, and I use as well, is an iPad. And if you're a Mac user, you can wirelessly connect the iPad. You know, I have faculty that ran their class on their Mac and then would switch to the iPad when they wanted to write on the screen and stuff. You can do that with, there's a zillion devices that can do it. I find it indispensable. I also think that it's nice, certainly from when you're teaching, if you have a second monitor, because I want to see their faces. And this came up, and particularly when Bivin and Barbara were talking about large classes versus small classes. We have a lot of large classes, although we're trying to break them up. I find it entirely different doing a class of 15 students versus 60. You just can't. And so a couple people brought up this warm calling. So I need a second monitor, and I put all the faces on the second monitor. Sometimes even they don't fit, a big monitor if you can. And then I have the other screen, which is my Surface, that I share, and I'm going from app to app and writing on them whenever I need to. And I also would say that if I have 15 or 20 faces on the screen, I do lots of cold calling. You can see everyone, you can call on everyone and have them do this and that. If you have 60, it doesn't work. And then 60, and I still do warm calling with the smaller, but when I had the larger classes, that's when I started using this warm calling, and it turned out, I thought, very effective. And I would assign small groups. There's 60 students, and I'd break them up into groups of 5, and I'd say, you're going to be responsible for leading this part of the discussion. You're going to be responsible for leading this part of the discussion. And then it gets going, and you have a bunch of students talking a lot, and then you can start cold calling along with it. So I think, you you know, you do have to adjust based on, you know, a lot of things, including the size of the class.
Lacey, I was going to piggyback. So I did go out and buy the bigger monitor that I have hooked up to my laptop. And one of the other things is I have a stand-up desk in my office. So as I was dealing with 2 different locations, I have a standing desk. And so I'm used to teaching standing up and moving. And I have found that to be fantastic. And the remote still works with it. So it was like $100 table from Walmart that we had for the kids that I moved into my office. But it has been a lifesaver. And then I'm not sitting all day also.
Mm-hmm. We have another question that has come in. It says, it seems to me that what we're doing is digital teaching rather than online teaching. We're trying to simulate traditional classroom environment using technology from remote. What would you do differently so that students were able to be more self-directed and self-paced?
I can offer a perspective if that's okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that came up in my conversations, especially with the excellent folks in the Center for Teaching Excellence at SMU, is that this is digital teaching. This is not online teaching, right? Anyone who teaches online education knows that this is not the way that you would deliver content or get things back. In physics, there's a lot of emphasis on exams. And the very first thing, if we had to go all digital, I would throw the exams out and replace everything with projects. Now, I do projects anyway as part of my classes. In honors physics, the students have a 14-week project that they have to do. It's team-based and they build it up in pieces. And there are 3 major checkpoints where they give 15-minute presentations showing the progress on the project. And it ends in a poster session. And this semester, they recorded videos as well. In modern physics, they do a 14-week project and they give a presentation at the end as a team. I would probably replace the exams with better checkpointing on the project and grading the checkpoints more thoroughly. That way they can be self-guided in the intervals in between with supervision from me. That's what I would do differently.
All right. Christoper,
can I add something real quick? I guess there's a question. I'll do it real short. I've converted on this and I completely agree with Steve on this one. In a lot of our classes in the business school for graduate education, we have these really short modules. And so a lot of the classes the final exam is almost the entire grade for the class. And a lot of mine have been that way. Also because, you know, when we give exams in class, you can monitor the academic honesty a little bit better. And so I've always liked to put more weight on that because I felt it was more real, like a lot of us. And I agree. I just think in the online world, when you're given assessments and stuff online, it doesn't work very well. I think in fact, I'll do it for sure. And maybe even in the classroom a little bit more when we are face-to-face, is that break up smaller assignments, projects, and designing take-home things and stuff. And not any one assignment be worth, you know, a lion's share of the grade because you just don't know. So I just wanted to echo that. I think I'm fully converted and convinced on that.
Christoper, do you want to get the last words in as we have 3 minutes?
Regardless of the semantics of digital or online learning, in the end, particularly at least in my art form, you've got to at least set up what it is, the actual rubric, what part of the body, what mechanics are you necessarily working on. I'll pre-record videos that I will send to them that they can work on outside of class. I'm demonstrating in class. Then I also use Panopto to where they upload videos of their interpretation of it. Then I do one-on-one sessions with them where we are both viewing that video. And there's these major revelations that go on that they seeing themselves in the video form. Granted, it kills the life of it, but the macro is there. Your arm is there or it is not. And at the end of that session, there's this great realization from the student, having used that technology, that they've got to now change their direction. And so I think that you know, regardless of what you call it, you've got to impart the information, the goals, and the physics. And one of the benefits, at least for me, is that I teach dance kinesiology prior to teaching them, like say the modern 2, level 2 in modern. And they already have these biomechanical principles in there. So it's really a culmination of various theoretical into the practicum. But really, the whole idea being is that they really understand what they're doing. They're able to demonstrate it. They're able to look at it and discern it, and both on themselves and on others. So whatever format you might call that, it's still just, you know, moving forward.
All right. That is a brilliant way to kind of sum up ways to interact. I know that, Bivin, would you like to do kind of an exit for us to wrap things up?
Oh, well, yeah, if there's enough time, it looks like we've got like 1 minute here. Again, wanted to piggyback. Can you probably hear me? Oh, cool. One more time on it wouldn't be appropriate if it wasn't piggybacking off of Steven again. He was talking about humanity, like keeping it human. And I can't underline that enough. And we can do that in the classroom. And everyone has their own way, their own personality comes across. But just because, you know, we can all see that, you know, you can see facial expressions and kind of moving around. So what I like to do at the end, just as an example, and everybody has their own thing that'll work for them that you know, that kind of shows their personality, is it's very like an athletic type thing. So it's like if we would at the end of practice or in a game, everybody kind of puts their hand in here and then goes 1, 2, 3. And so if we could try it here with just our panelists, I hate to put everybody on the spot, but it goes a little something like this. And you can imagine as many people as you have. I think you can fit 25 people on a Zoom screen. So you go, so don't do it yet, but we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then the word is whammo. And then you just do whatever freestyle you got, whammo. So, all right, 1, 2, 3, boom,
Whammo.
Oh.
and yeah, so it's one way to bring human side to it. Thanks, Lacey, and thanks.
You're
everybody.
welcome. And thank you all for attending this session, and I hope that you got something out of it and you enjoyed your time with us.